human nature, truth and lies, and how to form genuine connections with one's fellow man. These are the concerns at the heart of Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji, and they're woven through the entire story in extraordinarily meaningful ways. So, in this video, I want to explore the themes, symbolism, and story structure in the first part of the Kaiji manga, with particular focus on the steel frame run and the Game of Emperor, and show how these are more than just nail-biting games of chance. In these stories, Kaiji offers a truly profound exploration of nothing less than what it means to be human. Hello, my name is Sean, and for full transparency, I have to admit that I've only read the first part of the manga, meaning up to the end of the first season of the anime. I'm fully aware that most everyone watching this knows way more about the story than I do, most likely. Nevertheless, I really wanted to put out this video because I was blown away by what I read and needed to express my thoughts. So I hope you'll hear me out, since I think I've got some really interesting insights to offer to you about the story. Also, I'd be very appreciative if you didn't spoil me on what happens next, because I'll certainly be continuing my journey through Kaiji in due course. So, just very briefly, for those who might not be familiar with the series, Kaiji is a legendary ongoing gambling manga that started in 1996 and very much feels like this voice of a generation type of story for the youth of the so-called lost decades of Japan. In its post-war era, Japan experienced a seemingly miraculous economic revival. A once despondent nation rose from the ashes into a global economic and technological powerhouse, on its way to become the world's most wealthiest nation. That is, until we reached the 90s, and the bubble burst. And just like that, all the promises of unlimited growth, wealth, and prosperity evaporated into thin air. In particular, for the young adults of the time whose prospect of economic security had been whisked away from them without a moment's notice. Kaiji is the story of this generation. The story follows eponymous protagonist Ito Kaiji, one of the many youths who'd been betrayed by the promises of neoliberal ideology. He'd been conned, buried in debt, and forced to compete against other downcast and marginalized members of Japanese society in deeply unfair and humiliating games of chance in order to regain basic ownership of his life. My starting point for the purposes of this video is the end of the first game in the series. I don't want to bog down this video with summaries, but in essence, Kaiji teamed up with two fellow contestants for the express purpose of helping each other survive the ordeal. But right when they've just about grasped victory, our hero's alleged allies are seduced by the whiff of money and stab him in the back. And so we find our protagonist at his lowest point yet, naked and degraded, snowed under in even more debts than with which he began. But let's look at the moment where Kaiji reaches his lowest point so far. He's stripped of all his vestments, all his markers of civilization, down on his hands and knees like a beast, and decries that those traitors are less than human. People who abandon their humanity for money are like mangy dogs crawling through the mud. This second act of treachery deeply warps Kaiji's beliefs about human nature, and so he's a changed person once he enters his next gambling stint. Our protagonist has become deeply illusioned in his fellow man, unable to trust or cooperate with any further participants. He feels like his eyes have been opened to the cold-hearted reality of the human condition. Even when faced with countless harrowing tales of suffering, most everyone would rather indulge in their own pleasure and luxury rather than reach out a helping hand. And so, Kaiji's experiences taught him that the only one he can rely on is himself. Moreover, Kaiji's newfound beliefs are validated by one of the arc's key characters, a former co-worker called Makoto Sahara. Sahara corroborates that they inhabit a dog-eats-dog world where everyone else is one's enemy. This is the worldview that is tested throughout Kaiji's second story arc. Nobody can be trusted on their words, and at the end of the day, people will gladly sacrifice others to ensure their own survival and prosperity. And during the first game, this view is all but confirmed. The contestants are lined up to cross a series of steel beams, and the first to reach the other side receives a prize of cash. But falling down means sustaining some serious injuries at the very least. So suddenly, the contestants find themselves incentivized to hurl down the person in front of them. And once again, the various participants reveal their true colors. When push comes, they shove. But then we enter the second contest, where all of these assumptions get flipped on their head. The remaining contestants must cross the steel beams once again, but this time from the roof of a high-rise building. In other words, this is no longer a matter of injury. Falling from the beams means certain death. There is one other critical difference with the previous contest, however. This time around, anyone who makes it across wins the prize. So, in other words, there's no longer any need for them to push down their fellow contestants. Kaiji's experiences so far have taught him that words are hollow, promises are empty, and no one would willingly help those around them if not for enlightened self-interest. These are the beliefs that are about to be tested as he and a group of people he barely knows shuffle across this terrifying chasm. And sure enough, as they find themselves staring deep down into the abyss, their precarious circumstances transform them into victims of their own imagination and paralyze them with fear. They're begging the others around them to extend a helping hand. Yet, as Sahara proclaims, none of them is in a position to save another person. After all, reaching out would be practically suicide. This is a contest that tests their ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It's every man for himself. But right then, the manga zooms out and reflects on how this contest serves as an allegory for society at large. In the world of capitalist competition, every man is an island, just as isolated as the destitute contestants crossing the steel beams. In truth, the manga's core conceit is that this inhumane contest is just a stripped-down version of the solitude that makes up modern life. We too live in a world where no one can successfully communicate their feelings or understand the thoughts of others, even though each and every one of us yearns to be understood, to be loved. And here, I just have to read out the heart-wrenching quote in full. If there are 5.7 billion people in the world, then there are 5.7 billion kinds of loneliness. Every last one of those people will die without solace, alone in utter solitude. When everything is said and done, living your life is nothing more than traversing one's figurative steel beam, all alone. So, in short, if the steel beam race serves as a metaphor for society and life at large, it follows that its conclusion will offer some penetrating insights about human nature. And as the race progresses, the contestants continue to fall to their demise one by one, until only two of them remain. Kaiji and Sahara, separated from each other by the insurmountable gulf between their two steel beams. And forgive me for harping on about this point, but from a narrative perspective, it's absolutely no coincidence that these are the two sole survivors. At the start of the arc, they rejected any attempt to cooperate with their fellow contestants, as the lesson so far has been that words can't be trusted and humans will stab each other in the back at the drop of a hat. So what makes this setup so interesting is that Kaiji and Sahara have no means of aiding each other, or of sabotaging each other, and that the other's fate doesn't affect them in any meaningful way. In other words, this is a litmus test that will examine the validity of their beliefs. How will these cynical, jaundiced figures interact with each other when they have absolutely nothing to win or lose from doing so? This situation prompts one further reflection, namely on the nature of human communication. Humanity can only convey their feelings, according to the manga, through signals, most notably the spoken word. And yet, those very words are prone to be misinterpreted, or even downright deceitful, as Kaiji learned the hard way back during his first gamble. But even despite all that, Kaiji and Sahara are seized by a seemingly instinctual yearning to reach out to another person undergoing their solitary struggle. And significantly, this doesn't take the form of any advice or support, but by something much more primal. A simple confirmation of one another's presence. Are they still here, suffering through this torturous experience together? Just this is enough. In essence, it doesn't even matter what they say, simply that they're saying something to the other. And it's solely by virtue of their shared humanity, their shared desire to engage with others, that they manage to pull through together. So in short, the answer to Kaiji's disillusionment from his first gamble is that he must seek a truth beyond the mere surface level meaning of another's words. And this revelation brings us to the dramatic centerpiece of the manga's first part. Now, I don't want to bog down this video with too much synopsis. Long story short, Sahara is the first to successfully traverse the entirety of the beam, but the two of them are deceived and Sahara gets blown down to his demise. And more than that, even after Kaiji survives the entire ordeal, he finds himself on the verge of being denied his prize on a technicality. He had earlier pleaded with the organizers to abort the trial. And as it turns out, they had done so, but only after it was too late for most of the contestants. This moment once more reinforces our central conceit. In the world of Kaiji, words can't be trusted. Dishonest actors will always find ways to manipulate and deceive. And so, Kaiji failed once again because he assumed that others would communicate with him in good faith. Nevertheless, the shady organization behind all of the gambles tosses him a bone and embroils him into another game of chance to earn back his winnings. And right here, the one to step forward is no one else but the main antagonist of the story. A man named Hyodo, the organization's ostensive leading figure, who takes charge of Tonegawa, the middle manager who'd been conducting the trials so far. So let me turn to Hyodo's main introduction for a moment, and how this ties into the thematic concerns of the story as a whole. As it appears, the world of Kaiji is one where duplicitous liars lord over credulous fools such as our protagonist, who has been duped 3 times by now. First, when he was conned into taking on a massive debt. Then, during the first gamble. And finally, when he was denied the reward for which he risked his life. And with the introduction of Hyodo, we are finally given some insights into how one reaches the pinnacle of this cutthroat society. The answer? By simply not listening to other people. Hyodo surely receives the most iconic introduction scene in the story so far. As Kaiji is led to the hall for his next gamble, they encounter some of the injured contestants from the first beamwalk. And it's here that Hyodo exemplifies his guiding philosophy. He proclaims that the world is filled with losers begging people to help others, given the inherent unfairness of the world. This top dog, however, has always remained true to his beliefs. Never once in his life has he aided another. And to explain why not, Hyodo offers a simple demonstration. By relentlessly beating the living daylight out of one of the injured contestants. And while the halls resound with wails of agony, none of this phases the ultimate villain. After all, Hyodo remarks, nobody truly feels another man's pain. And in his view, understanding this vital truth is what distinguishes winners from losers. Now, this monologue, of course, offers some vivid characterization for the arc's main villain. However, what I find even more significant is how Hyodo's beliefs square up with what had been established during the Steel Beamwalk. What needs to be acknowledged first is that the narrative of Kaiji actually justifies some of Hyodo's beliefs. The idea that the steel beams serve as an allegory for life hinges on one specific point of comparison. Each person lives a life of isolation, and when it comes down to it, nobody can truly reach another person. At best, you can support each other by sending signals from afar. So, in that sense, Hyodo has correctly observed that when all is said and done, other people won't, or even can't actually extend a helping hand to a person in need. Nevertheless, the manga's true message is a far cry from Hyodo's misanthropic cynicism. After all, we're immediately shown the glaring juxtaposition between Hyodo's conduct and the lessons Kaiji absorbed from experiencing the essence of human existence on top of the steel beams. To put it simply, Hyodo distinguishes himself from the losers of society because he isn't stirred by the outcries of others. In contrast, Kaiji was able to survive by virtue of his willingness to listen and respond to Sahara's calls, because he learned that you can only keep trudging forward by transmitting your heat, the rhythm of your breath, and your very existence itself. To put it simply, in the world of Kaiji, help isn't measured in magnanimous acts of generosity. Rather, one's mere presence, even a simple call, is enough to save the lives of others. And as we will see, the eventual downfall of Kaiji's opponents arises from their inability to truly listen. So, Hyodo pits Kaiji against his subordinate Tonegawa in a card game called Emperor. Now, I'm going to spare you the details here, but very short, Emperor consists of 12 rounds where each contestant plays one of 3 types of cards from their hand face down, and every card type wins and loses against one other card type. However, as Kaiji doesn't have any funds to wager, he must instead wear a device over his ear that will push a needle ever closer to his eardrum for every bet he loses. But more importantly, let's have a look at what is thematically at stake in the game of Emperor. And with that, I don't mean Kaiji's hearing. Or do I? As they prepare to face off, Tonegawa establishes that Emperor is a game that exposes a quintessential truth about human nature. People always speak either truthfully or falsely, and anyone who can't distinguish truth from lies will always be exploited by those around them, as Kaiji's predicament appears to demonstrate. So, from Tonegawa's point of view, the one to emerge victorious from the game of Emperor is whoever is best at sniffing out their opponent's lies. Just like how society at large distinguishes winners from losers by their ability to deceive, rather than being deceived. With all that, the game of Emperor is firmly situated within the manga's ongoing concerns about communication, and this becomes even more pronounced as the game progresses. When Kaiji finds himself on a losing streak, Tonegawa asks him if he's ever experienced a conversation like this one before. One where he's been more determined to uncover what someone else is thinking. Tonegawa proclaims that one's everyday conversations are filled with superficiality or even lies, in contrast to the true conversations he's currently having with Kaiji. And once again, these views map onto what had been established about the failures of human communication in the Steel Beam arc. Despite everyone's innermost desire to express their true feelings, ordinary words are fallible and prone to misinterpretation. So now at last, the manga reveals through Tonegawa how to have a genuine heart-to-heart with another human being. Gambling allows people to have true conversations because the best gamblers are those who successfully peer into the minds of others. And that's why gambling alone has the power to erase the boundaries of age, gender, class, and nationality. For Tonegawa, gambling is a universal, transcendental language. And so, Kaiji risking his ear in this game holds deep metaphorical significance. If gambling is a figurative conversation, Kaiji's price for potentially failing to listen is losing his hearing for good. But as the game progresses and our protagonist experiences an increasingly implausible string of losses, he realizes that there must be foul play involved. And sure enough, he soon discovers the truth. There's a sensor and transmitter in the device around his ear, measuring his pulse and body temperature, and sending this to Tonegawa's watch. And with this data, Tonegawa could determine which card Kaiji played. So basically, all of Tonegawa's talk about how he senses the tremblings of Kaiji's heart was meant in an absurdly literal sense. In fact, this revelation completely undermines Tonegawa's philosophy of gambling being a conversation. All this time, he hasn't made any real efforts to listen to Kaiji. And in one of the most satisfying reversals I've ever read, this failure to adhere to his own teachings becomes Tonegawa's undoing. Moreover, around the same time, Kaiji senses something else. His table had been surrounded by a taciturn crowd of onlookers, namely the losers from the earlier contest who gathered in support of their unlikely champion. And here's the crux of the situation. These aren't people who would stick out their necks for Kaiji. They won't even raise their voices for him. Yet, just the knowledge that he's not fighting alone is more than enough to fill Kaiji's heart. Once more, this scene parallels the Steel Beam Walk, with the onlookers essentially fulfilling the same role as Sahara did before. They might be unable to offer any concrete help, and yet they saved Kaiji by their mere presence, by their shared humanity. Well, I say that, but this time around the onlookers actually take on quite a spectacular role for themselves, because Kaiji needs some accomplices. During the game, Kaiji withdraws into the restroom for a moment, where he proceeds to smash his fist against the glass. Tanegava, of course, immediately detects the changes in his opponent's physical condition, and deduces what must be going on. Kaiji is harming himself to throw off his opponent's readings. Tanegava, however, simply proceeds to stall for time until the transmissions have stabilized. But that's when Kaiji pulls off the most spectacular, insane gambit in the story so far and cashes in his first real victory against Tanegava. As it turns out, Kaiji hadn't just injured his hand, but actually cut off his very ear. He then handed the severed organ to one of his accomplices in the bathroom so that Tanegava's watch would monitor the condition of an entirely different person. So, let's dissect everything that goes into making this moment such a remarkable instance of symbolic irony. To start with, the game of Emperor was preceded by a scene establishing the central characteristic of Kaiji's antagonists, namely that they don't truly register the cries of pain around them. And that's exactly what we see with Tanegava as well. While all the onlookers bear witness to Kaiji's deafening cries during his act of self-mutilation, the one person who should be paying attention to his opponent is only monitoring the dials of his watch. And thus, we get perhaps the most poignant paradox in the story so far. Kaiji demonstrated the validity of Tanegava's claims that gambling is the truest form of conversation by cutting off the organ that allows you to hear others. And more than that, he claimed his first victory by actualizing the lesson he learned from Sahara. That communication is about something much more fundamental than words, namely about transmitting one's heat. After all, Kaiji's accomplice throws off Tanegava's sensors with the heat of his body. So, with this outrageous exploit, Kaiji has turned the tide of the match. And now, there's only one more round remaining. At last, the two contestants are situated on a level playing field and forced to engage in genuine conversation. And what immediately jumped out to me here is how the roles have been completely reversed. Back when Tanegava held an unfair advantage, he was the one using words to rile up his opponents. But now that he can no longer fall back on this trickery, he finds that Kaiji is suddenly getting under his skin. Or to put it differently, the one who's missing an ear is no longer getting rattled by empty words. That brings me to the Emperor Games grand finale. Back when Kaiji unveiled his ploy with the ear, he also took the opportunity to mark some of the cards with splatters of blood. This move, however, also came to Tanegava's attention, and immediately his mind goes into overdrive. Surely, Kaiji must be aware of the stains and using this to misdirect him, as he switched out the cards right before he bled over them. And so, Tanegava adapts accordingly, certain that he'll evade Kaiji's poison. So, with this as their final confrontation, the two reveal their last cards. And that's when it becomes apparent which of the two treated their gamble as a conversation with another person. As Tanegava establishes, true gambling means peering deep into the recesses of your opponent's soul and distinguishing truth from lies. And as the both of them show their hand, Kaiji reveals that he never switched out the cards all along. Tanegava is completely exacerbated by this. After all, Kaiji had basically signaled to him which card he had played, and could have been countered then and there. But that's the core contrast between the two of them. In their extensive 12-round conversation, Kaiji had surmised what kind of person Tonegawa is and trusted that he'd act accordingly, as the cheater that he is. Tonegawa, on the other hand, had simply projected his own worldview onto Kaiji, despite ostensibly understanding that Kaiji is nothing like him. When everything is said and done, Kaiji proved himself the superior conversation partner. Tonegawa had announced loud and clear that in his book, losers are those who allow themselves to be deceived, and so he would naturally never allow himself to stoop to that level. And so, Kaiji surpassed Tonegawa's world of lies by staying true. And in a truly poetic reversal of fates, Kaiji's victory over the philosophies of Tonegawa and Hyodo allows him to enact his own values upon the world, at least in a small measure. Back at the start of the game, Kaiji had requested one further reward if he'd come out victorious: that Tonegawa would get on his knees and apologize for all the wanton cruelty he had inflicted. So, once Tonegawa has lost the match, Hyodo comes out and recalls one of the story's central concerns: that there's a large gulf between the contents of someone's words and the true spirit behind them. Hyodo derived this insight from the countless empty prostrations and apologies he received over the years. To put it differently, simply bowing down is hardly a heartfelt apology. And so, Hyodo decrees that this apology must carry weight, and produces a scorching plate on which Tonegawa must prostrate himself for 10 seconds. Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji is a story about truth and lies, about how to succeed in the world, and about the shortcomings of the spoken word. We follow Kaiji's miraculous ascent from his lowest point, where he was forced on all fours after he was confronted with the ugliest, most treacherous aspects of human nature. And so, when Kaiji eventually comes out on top against his enemies, this victory is demarcated by having them experience the very same humiliation that once had been his to endure, but on his own terms. He forces them to commit a searing act of sincerity and expose their failure for all to see. No words necessary. Now, I realize I haven't even reached the conclusion of Kaiji's first part, yet this feels like the appropriate moment to stop for now. I'll definitely keep reading on, and who knows, maybe I'll continue this analysis at some stage. But before I let you go, I want to give a huge shout out to the people who made this video possible. Firstly, to Gabriel Lewis, who did a spectacular job editing this video. And secondly, to my generous supporters on Patreon for my Blue Lock channel. In particular, I want to thank my €10 patrons, Patrician Pat, Orangey Legend, and Trishla the Best Boy. Words might not always convey what you want to say, but your support really has helped me free up the time to make this video, and that's something I deeply appreciate. So, until next time, Slán go fóill.